While the Great War practically defined modern small arms and tactics, very few original designs emerged from the conflict. Those rare new pieces had to be either very effective or very simple to manufacture. Our gun today is both. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is a submachine gun, or a Maschinen Pistole, model 18, 1I? We'll get to that confusion in a moment, but for now, let's get this guy over to the light box. With an overall length of just 32 inches, this is a handy carbine-sized item, but it still weighs in at 9 1/4 pounds, so it's pretty dense. The magazine capacity is 32 rounds of 9x19 parabellum that is of course fed through the Luger's trommel magazine. Most viewers of this show are going to be very familiar with what a submachine gun is, a fully automatic pistol caliber carbine thing of sorts, but this was unheard of way back when war were declared. The Great War was begun with a mix of Napoleon-era tactics and a glimmer of the modern. Most memorable was the use of effective artillery barrage in both attack and defense, and while the French 75 was king in 1914, artillery pieces saw increasing attention and development throughout the war. But we're a show that focuses on firearms, and the wartime developments in that field would actually be focused more on automatic/machine guns. Germany had it figured out best pre-war, putting strong emphasis on the heavy Maxim machine gun as the heart of infantry support and a cornerstone of defense in depth. While other nations had stocked up on automatic arms as well, their tactical use was limited and production struggled to catch up as these former tokens of, semi-artillery became mission-critical automatic guns. In trying to defeat the heavy machine guns on defense, armies on both sides would start to reach for light machine guns to take on the assault with them. We've actually done a whole mini-series comparing most of these, and in the end found that the air-cooled Lewis gun was just about the best. But that's because the Lewis provides a light, portable automatic capable of repeated burst firing with a large magazine capacity, easily reloaded and easily controlled. Even so, the gun was cumbersome to fire on the move and required firing from a semi-fixed position. Light machine guns would be paired with rifle grenades and support infantry and pitted against emplaced machine guns and other hard defenses, finally resulting in an effective ground-borne means of breaking up these defensive nests. Germany adopted the same strategy and would even take it a step further, developing what is commonly called Hutier tactics, though that name was never really used by the Central Powers that I can tell. These were infiltration tactics, beginning in late 1915, and at first referred to as Pioneer Sonderabteilung, they would later take the moniker Sturmtruppen. These were heavily armed units with carbines, grenades, pistols, and especially light machine guns. Their job was to work into the cracks, eke their way into the opposite line, get behind the enemy, stay quiet. When they did encounter resistance, they had to act fast and with extreme violence in order to completely silence the threat before an alert could be sounded to the rest of the enemy's forces. When successful, these German assault teams would dot the Entente's front lines, silently waiting for an attack by either side. Only once the battle was begun would they reveal themselves, surprising their opponents and opening wider tracks of opportunity for their own oncoming infantry. To quote Lieutenant Colonel G.S. Hutchinson, "We found that the advancing Germans had infiltrated between our gun posts, and we came under a hot machine gun fire at close range. Why we were not immediately torn to ribbons passes my comprehension. We dropped to the ground, and while the machine gun bullets flicked past our ears and ripped the haversacks on our backs, we worked our way down the furrows." The results were so incredible that the same strategy would be developed in just about every army of the war. And so we again see an emphasis on light machine guns, which is why we see the rush development of systems like the Shosha and the MG0815, developing devastating and overwhelming firepower from a small team for a brief, violent period was an excellent strategy. But while the heavy machine guns were worked into light machine guns, the attempt at adaptation of the slow, manually operated bolt-action rifles of the war into shoulder-fired automatics, well, that was going kinda weird. Look, imagine it this way. You're an infantryman with a rifle. The artillery have blasted the enemy line, and your heavy machine guns are like marking beaten zones wherever they can to limit reinforcements. A light machine gun is chugging away a few feet from you, chasing whatever enemy hard points it can find. Your buddy, Kevin's blasted off a few grenades that looks like, you know, the enemy line's starting to yield from all this, but at some point you have to stand up and march yourself right across to that next trench, and at that point it is down to you and your rifle, and that is a bolt action. That sinking feeling, that sheer panic of knowing that you have to work a bolt as fast as you can for just 5 rounds, maybe 10 with a Lee Enfield, that is why the bayonet remained an important weapon in the Great War. And so, in a strange way, an infantry automatic rifle or carbine was an attempt to improve on not just the rifle, but the bayonet. If you take that perspective, the BAR, the Browning Automatic Rifle, and other full-powered automatics are okay. They're difficult to control under fully automatic fire and still large and heavy, long and awkward for trench work. You can see why they never really caught on, and to be honest, Germany never developed one in earnest. Instead, they had something of a unique experience because Germany had not one, but 2 wartime stocked pistols already in service. We have episodes on both the older C96, drafted into the war after the battle had started, and the Luger LP08, a long-barreled stocked pistol developed for the German artillerymen so that they would have a weapon effective to 200 meters, and yet light enough to keep on their person while working in the field. Once that LP08 was in the German supply line, it became something of an attention getter with the Air Corps, who went on to request their own for use as a pilot or navigator's backup weapon up in the sky. Now, while the 9mm Parabellum has become the defensive cartridge of the past century, I'm not so sure it's my preferred for air-to-air combat. So if you're going to be stuck with it, you might as well be stuck with a lot of it, making the Luger's limited magazine capacity a huge problem. The same issue was plaguing one of the few auto-loading rifles available to Germany, which was also being fielded on aircraft, the SIG Mondragon. A solution was provided by engineer Friedrich Blum, whose drum or trommel magazine provided 30 rounds of 7x57 for the aviation rifles then in service. It was a relatively simple matter to scale this design down to 9mm Parabellum and pair it with the LP08 pistol. Now at this point, the notion is still one for aviation, but once you have that 32 round drum magazine available for the LP08, that little carbine package, well, this gets pretty intimidating looking and makes for a pretty handy close quarters weapon. Again, we've covered this gun in more detail before, but suffice it to say, the German infantry assault teams became very interested. So much so that the LP08 was experimentally converted to select fire. But that light pistol with its toggle joint lock was difficult to control, and especially with the lightness of the bolt, it had a nearly useless fire rate. The same was tried for the C96, which again suffered that same problem with controllability and just overwhelmingly fast fire. Much later on, in the late 1920s or early 30s, this idea would be tried again, though mostly sold in China. Now I know that some of you are already yelling at that screen to tell me that there was, by 1915, already a fully automatic pistol caliber light machine gun in service. Ah yes, the Viller Parossa, a twin-barrel 9mm Glicenti, because it's Italian, ultralight machine gun. Interestingly, this was also designed for aviation use, but the Italian army would field it on the ground, using it in the same assault and infiltration roles, as well as for forward defense. Unfortunately, its extreme fire rate also made it ineffective and difficult to use, and it didn't really replace the bayonet, more like a poor man's light machine gun. The Villa Perosa is also fairly complex to manufacture, and so tool up in production would be slow and difficult for such little gain, so the German Gewehrprüfungskommission, or GPK, would put together their own requirements for a pistol caliber assault weapon. From here things get pretty secretive with a dash of long lost, so we have very little to go on. Records from the Rheinmetall Company reveal the following requirements by the spring of 1916. The GPK had requested a compact carbine-sized gun chambering the 9mm parabellum cartridge, and it had to have a locked breech. And that's it for sure, but I suspect from what few guns we know of that they also wanted to match the LP08's barrel length of 200mm. This request was apparently circulated among a number of manufacturers. We know of technical drawings, patents, or other evidence from several firms, Hoffman, Schwarzloza, and Walther, all designed guns that fit this bill, each with a locked breech, and the Walther even had like a crazy inverted Lewis gun pan magazine thing. I think it's cool looking. Mauser would provide a dedicated pistol carbine, breaking the rule for fully automatic fire, but still using a locked breech system. While a few were made, this did not see wide adoption. Instead, the competition was won by another rule breaker, Hugo Schmeisser. Son of an arms designer, the famous Louis Schmeisser, Hugo had taken a job at the same company as his father around 1900. This was, of course, the famous Theodor Bergmann Waffenbau of Seoul. Now, it's worth mentioning the elder Schmeisser and his parent firm because, conveniently enough, both were involved in pistol development pre-war. Schmeisser pistols were best known for their simple blowback actions and handy takedown systems for easier cleaning and maintenance. We saw one of Louis's guns way back in our Dreise 1907 episode, a handgun named for the German rifle, and as we said in that episode, Louis had left Bergmann around 1905. That means son Hugo became the technical manager and therefore became the backbone of Bergmann's arms development, making him their man behind the light machine gun. Not this one. It's suggested that his father may have helped him with this particular design, the Bergmann 15, but we'll have to explore that another day if we get lucky. Okay, so he might have to share credit with his father on the light machine gun, but this guy today, no, this is all Hugo. This is Hugo's baby. The bulk of it was summed up in a patent which was only granted to Theodor Bergmann after the war and shows some subsequent improvement. The big thing is the original Schmeisser appears to have had a straight double-stack magazine like you would normally expect on a more modern submachine gun, but the GPK at the time, in that intervening period between initial prototype production and actually adopting this gun, they added a requirement that the gun must accept the standard Luger trommel magazine. This would avoid duplicated effort, and it had been quite the headache to even get these magazines into production already. Now with that change, and despite being a blowback, Schmeisser's gun was actually phenomenal. It was effective, controllable, light and handy, well, light, and it was reliable, and above all else, it was dead simple to manufacture. It was perfection militarily, and so it saw rapid adoption in 1918, making it the Maschinen Pistole model of 1918, or MP18, and somewhere in all that, this comma and this mark right here were added, which is a huge mystery. Is it a capital I for improved or some other German word, or is it the Roman numeral 1 indicating the first of several variations? Perhaps 4 were tried and the first variation was preferred. Is it just added because of the magazine difference? Maybe this is like the first version and we know we're gonna go to a stick mag later? I honestly lean towards it being a Roman numeral over an I, but I still don't know what it stands for, and neither does anybody else to any reliable degree. But regardless, we now know why they made this little guy, and we know what it is, so let's get a little closer look. I have a submachine gun. Check it out. Front sight, we've got a barrel shroud, ventilated, front sling swivel. As I bring her around, we've got our mag well with, let me get that in position, release button, and as I bring her back, we're going to see our rear sight, which I suspect has something to do with the designation of comma 1. Look how long the sight base is. I don't know, man. Something seems like it was up there, but I can't prove anything. Instead, we only have, and all of them only have, a 100 or 200 meter rear sight. It's very sensible for the cartridge that's in the gun. Very simple to flip between the two. So bring her back, you'll see we have a takedown button here. More on that in a moment. And we have the trigger. I hope you know what that's for. If I bring her back again, semi-pistol grip stock, rear sling swivel, metal butt plate. Pretty standard stuff. Now, walking her back to the center and taking her up to our other camera, you're gonna see, let me get this where you can, that we have a charging handle. Now that charging handle is currently in the safe position, and so it is disengaged from the sear. But if I were to put this down, it'll ride on the sear, and that means that this is an open bolt design. So right now, I can reach right in there. There's no round chambered. It would be sitting at the top of the magazine if we had a loaded magazine. And then when I pull this trigger, she drops. Now, if I were to release the trigger, this thing would drop, strip around, put it in the chamber, bang, and it's going to recoil and then come back forward and catch the sear. There is no select fire on this gun. This is how you would fire it semi-auto. You would feather the trigger fast enough to be able to keep her in single or maybe 2-round burst. Not going to be very accurate in semi-auto anyway because of this long lock time, the time between pulling the trigger and it actually firing the gun. That's a lot of time in order for your aim to be disrupted. You're moving your hands, you're anticipating, there's mass moving around, there's springs moving around. This gun's not going to be much of an accurate piece beyond 200 meters, just on the basis of it being a large mass moving forward for such a long distance. Very clearly a short-range weapon. Now, if you were to hold the trigger, this gun will just keep cycling. There's nothing to stop the bolt. It's just gonna get blown back, it's gonna ride forward, go bang, blow back, ride forward, go bang. So whenever you release, that's when she locks open. Super simple operation of the gun. By the way, most of the books I've read seem to repeat a fire rate of about 400 rounds per minute. I kind of disagree. Period manuals reference 32 shots of mowing fire in 3.5 seconds. That maths out to 550 rounds per minute. And once we got our gun restored, it did about the same. The most Schmeisser-y thing about this gun to me, looking at pre-submachine gun Schmeissers, is the simple and direct takedown method. So in order to do that, I'm going to take this gun off of safe. Oh, there we go. I'm going to drop that bolt all the way forward. So she's down there, obviously no rounds in there. And then on the side, let me get this where you guys can see it. I'll push this doohickey button right here in and crack that open. As that opens up, we'll see we have our transfer bar for the trigger mechanism, all those goodies. But more importantly at the front, let me see if this will show up for you guys. We have some witness marks, 2 of them to be exact. And if I push this guy in and turn and get ready for some pressure, and I mean some pressure, without going crazy, I can just let that guy off. And as I let that guy off, we've got a guide rod that's attached to our rear cap that is part of our takedown plunger. So our recoil spring is powering our takedown plunger. That's pretty cool. This recoil spring comes out, and then we retract everything. May have to turn it down. Oh, yeah, let me show that where you guys can see it. All right. Here we go below what would be the wood line in order to catch that groove. And that allows us to come all the way to the rear. So we come all the way to the rear, and our bolt and firing pin come out. Super simple bolt construction. Just some guiding cuts on this side, firing pin and extractor on the front. This bolt is a little ugly because it's been restored. As a matter of fact, this whole gun's been restored. You may have seen the anvils on it. This thing was welded up and it has been put back into service because someone at the time did not want to do the ATF cuts on it. And so they registered it even though it was welded up, which was very good because it allowed it to be restored at a later date in a completely legal way, which is great. So basic bolt. The interesting thing is that the firing pin is separate. There's some theory that this uses an advanced primer ignition method, which means the firing pin, especially because it's independent, gets to strike down and discharge that round ever so slightly before this forward mass reaches its zenith. So in other words, the bolt is not quite done traveling forward when it goes bang. and that means that the bang has to stop the bolt and drive it rearward. This is being debated a little bit. We're trying to get some examples in to look at because it's such a small measurement that even after some field wear, you may or may not get that benefit anyway. So, you know, be warned. Some sources will say advanced primer ignition, some won't. It's a little up in the air. I haven't really torn into enough pieces to be 100% sure. Just know that that's a thought that's out there. So with those guys apart, the gun is in enough of a detail strip that we can service it. There's nothing really fancy to go through, but if you wanted to go further, and we're not, you would come up to the front here, and the front sight itself is a drift. So it's a key that is set across our shroud, and then it's tabbed into, if you look at the very front of this guy, it's tabbed into this cap right here, which can be spun off like a rotary phone. And when you spin that guy out, you free the barrel to come right out. The reason I'm not going to bother doing that right now is that this gun was hand put back together for restoration. The barrel's pressed in there kind of nicely. I don't want to disturb it right now just for the show. All you need to know is drive this guy out, spin that, barrel comes out. Very simple to change in the field. Excellent military weapon. Now, not visible here because of the new made barrel is the fact that this gun in the chamber has that same offset obturation as you saw in the Luger, which we discussed in that earlier episode. This was a precursor to the fluted chamber and wasn't a long-lasting feature of 9mm handguns or submachine guns. Now, of course, this system right here relies on a magazine, and you know, it's pretty unique, but we've seen it before, right? We did the LP08 episode. I still think, though, we should cover a little history. Two variations of the Luger trommel magazine were made, but the first was replaced by the time of our gun today, so we only care about the second variation. It was produced at Geoffrey Bing AG of Nuremberg, known at the time for their tin-plated children's toys. As a matter of fact, they were the largest toy maker in the world by 1915. While exact production is unknown, as many as 800,000 may have been produced in the waning years of the war, the bulk of which would have been destroyed afterwards, as we'll see. Like a big pizza pie, but let's look at something else first. This sleeve is the most unique component here. The rest of this fits in a Luger as is, but in order to fit it to the submachine gun and not drive everybody crazy with a big hunk of metal sticking off, they needed this little spacer in order to make it work with the short magwell of the MP18, which still sticks out quite a bit. So don't lose this guy, and trust me, you will, because when you go to load this action, and by the way, this is a reproduction loader, but it works just fine. This loader will not pair down with this system unless you have that guy out of the way. He will not fit. I'm sorry, guys, I'm trying to find somewhere where my depth of field works out. He just won't, looks like he fits, but every time it fights me. So nope, just go without that guy. So take him off, set him aside, don't lose him, and then you can use your nice little water pump for cartridges. Now, you can, in theory, load this magazine up one round at a time by pumping and putting and pumping and putting until you get to about maybe 10 to 12 rounds, at which point you're going to meet so much resistance that you can no longer do anything about it unless you come to the back of the gun. Now, to make my life easier, I'm going to remove this guy and bring it to the rear. Let me get that where you can see it. At the back of the gun, we have this big old, or the back of the magazine rather, we have this big old cocking arm. And what I have to do is I have to rotate this, and it is no easy feat. Oh, hand strengthening exercises, go. Once I'm all the way back here, I push this button and hold it until it falls into a keyway, and there she's locked. Woohoo! So from there, you would have your water pump back at the end of the gun, and you would pump away. So I would attach this, and I would one by one insert round, pump, until I got 32 rounds in the gun. While you're doing this, you may notice that on occasion it binds, you struggle. Sometimes when you take it off, the follower tries to come flying out with you with extra amp. It's a nightmare. This system is cool, but cool does not mean good for a battlefield. This is kind of nuts, like having all these little pieces everywhere. In addition to all this, you would also have a cap to protect the magazine from wear. So you'd pull the magazine, take the cap off, and I'm not sure if they discarded them or threw the caps in their pocket for reuse. I have no idea there. So you'd have a cap, this spacer, and this loader for handling these mags. That's a bit wild, and I can already tell that this thing's gonna try to throw the follower. Check it out. See right here where our follower is just kind of down in there? I'm gonna bop that. There we go, we got lucky. So that little pin right there, let me get the patented plastic and pokey. That little pin, if he's stuck in there, like a little grit gets in there, and you let that fly, that thing will just come right on out. So good luck to you guys. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Now, what is interesting about this mechanism, if I get to the rear, is that as it unwinds, so I'm gonna have to do this with the arm extended, there is a notch, and I'm sorry, I'm going off a field. This notch here at the back, where that arm kind of cocks up into the corner, if you were to read that notch against these numbers that are written on the back of the cylinder, so I think I have it in good focus, you'll have some numbers around the rim. That's how many rounds you have remaining as it comes around the clock until you get to the base, which is where you lose track because now everything's residing up in the stick portion of the, this is the most awkward shape to put on camera. The stick portion of the magazine. At this point, yeah, there's nothing about this mechanism that can help you keep track. They did not want to cut a window and make this an even worse nightmare to deal with. So the snail drum or trommel magazine is super cool to look at, but I don't know that I would call it the best battlefield accessory. Intimidating looking, cool looking, fascinating, yes, all the above. Something I would bet my life on, not a high rank there. All right, we've got a magazine and we've got a gun. Let's get both into Mae's hands for some demonstration.
The MP18 would be carried in a safe position unless in use. Just pull the charging handle rearward, lower, and release to ready the gun. The bolt now rests on the sear, highlighted here in pink. In turn, this is activated by the trigger bar via the trigger pull. Pressed forward by the recoil spring, the bolt strips around from the magazine and drives it into the chamber, where it is instantly fired, driving the unlocked bolt rearward. So long as the trigger is held, the bolt will be returned again by the recoil spring. The drum magazine feeds the cartridge's single stack through the left-hand side of the receiver. These are powered by a combination of a standard rectangular coil spring and a following armature, which is powered by its own clock spring. If we have the bolt, we can see the independent central firing pin at work. And the extractor in red, which does not grip the cartridge until after it is halted by the chamber. Pulling the spent case into the fixed ejector, it clears the way for the next round. With the magazine near empty, we can better see the unique hinged follower head and how the standard coil spring in red does the final work of feeding the last rounds. Overall, a simple gun and a complicated magazine.
You know what? It's pretty dang neat. Now, the Prussian War Ministry would order 50,000 MP18s from Theodore Bergmann, yet by the end of the war, fewer than 10,000 had made it into proper inventory. The highest serial number I'm aware of is 17,677, and so it's likely fewer than 20,000 were completed by 1919, 1920. It's estimated that roughly 3,000 may have made it into the front lines, so the gun did see some limited use. Period documents for this gun can be a bit scant. Post-war, what few were made were largely lost or destroyed, and I haven't seen any captured papers, as it was expressly forbidden to bring the training material for the MP18 to the front line. We do have access to a 1920 manual that was meant for police. More on that guy in a moment. Surprisingly, a lot of data has been turned up from supply documents as special equipment that was for specifically this gun helps reinforce our estimations of what was available. And then early post-war Czechoslovakian submachine gun training also carried on from the 1918 German tactics, which rounds out our picture. So what do we get when we put all that together? Submachine gun teams were made up of 6 shooters with MP18s. 6 additional ammo carriers were in tow, each with their own Gewehr 98 or Kar 98 AZ. The hope was to place one of these teams in each infantry company. Working independently, they would be directed by the company commander. The ration of 9mm ammunition for the whole team per day, 2,500 rounds. Handcarts were available for transportation when possible. Generally, the trommel magazine can be found in canvas holsters on the hip, designed to let the snail drum drop into the hand, or you can also see them hauled around in bulky wooden crates. These P-Kasten hold 5 magazines, 1 loader, 1 spare recoil spring, and 1 spare firing pin. Our 1920 manual lists 48 packages of 16 cartridges, but observed examples seem to display only 24. That fits because 16 rounds to a pack, 24 packages to a box, 6 boxes to a team, 2,304 cartridges. It's pretty close to that daily ration, and if we add up the full magazines, we get about 1,000 round surplus, which means that's sort of what you have to work with when you run out of your daily allowance. Notes from the construction and issue of P-Kasten tell us that the Stormtruppen weren't the only planned recipients of this MP18. Jaegers, bicycle, and even some regular infantry were to receive the boxes, and therefore we would presume they will receive the guns. Other notes have suggested that there was a broader plan to arm all officers, NCOs, and every 10th rifleman with the MP18. This was likely due to positive feedback from the front lines, which is also where it supposedly got the nickname Kugelspritz. Now, you all saw Mae shoot the MP18, and that grip seemed uncomfortable, I'm sure. A lot of people were probably getting ready to be like, you need to hold it up here, like I kind of do. Well, I'm sorry to say that is absolutely insisted upon. The grip right here in the manual, and my limited period photos show that they really took it seriously. So don't gripe with her about the grip, boys. Historically, that is accurate. And speaking of fire, there were 2 modes defined by German tacticians. The burst that you already saw Mae using, right? Well, brief firing periods. And then what was called mowing fire, a sweep of the gun in a defined arc of about 15 meters at 100 meters distance. This was meant to render that little region of the battlefield impenetrable at short range. So let's give it a try. Yeah, it does not take a lot of imagination to realize how effective this thing would have been in warfare, but that does not mean it is perfect. Complaints against the MP18 included, but were not limited to. The gun overall did not have the range of a proper light machine gun. Duh. It could theoretically be defeated by trench body armor, and also lacked the penetration through many other surfaces found in warfare. It's a factor for the cartridge, sure. The trommel magazine unbalanced the gun, and that same magazine was fragile, jamming easily when damaged. It was difficult to reload and required a special tool to do so. And it was awkward to handle in general, storing, carrying, and aligning for, inserting into the magazine well. So much so that it necessitated a man to be a magazine carrier, when a simple stick mag would have meant one-man portable submachine guns everywhere. Honestly, from my perspective, there are only two complaints that really matter. One, some people just didn't know what a submachine gun was for. That's a tactical issue. And then two, the magazines frankly stink. But apparently those two were enough to cause derision from the British, whose fact sheet on a captured MP18 released in October of 1918 dismissed this thing as a pistol gun and cited the same complaints that I've mentioned here. It's kind of funny, the Winchester 97 trench gun and the MP18 Kugelspritz both try to solve the same problem on the battlefield, where the shotgun was heralded as a miracle weapon and yet barely used and honestly did a terrible job in warfare. This gun was much derided and mocked from the Entente and yet did an extremely effective job in battle. Now, the fact that nobody seemed to want to visibly be impressed by this particular gun by the other side, they must have had something to fear, because this was banned for military use in the Treaty of Versailles, and like so many other German weapons of this period, you can find MP18s with a 1920 inventory stamp. And that's because, thanks to the disarming of the people law, well, all these guns were collected up by the government, and when they were done so, they paid a little cash to the people who turned them in, and since they're worth money, they might get stolen from inventory and sold back to the government, so we better go ahead, mark them, make sure we know that they've already been sold into the government once or were already in government storage so we don't get ripped off. It also proved that the gun had been inventoried and counted. Given the MP18 was banned from army use, many were destroyed, making them a rare piece to stumble upon today. Usually the ones we still have around survived by working for the police departments. Just like the American Thompson, they were used at home for riot and banditry control. Perhaps as many as 8,000 survived this way, though that's an estimation based on the legal limit to their use within Germany. Thanks to dropping the Luger LP08 and its trommel magazine from service, the stick magazine was finally fitted to the MP18, and a fair few underwent an interwar conversion into a straight stick pattern. Again, through World War II, both patterns were lost in large numbers through a mix of being refielded, police reserves being bombarded, and another post-war disarmament. Turning back to 1920 though, since the Bergmann Company could only manufacture the MP18 for police, and they had enough of those left over in surplus, the design was licensed out to SIG in Switzerland. Hugo Schmeisser hated this, as he likely had some financial interest in the patents. He would leave Bergmann over the matter and patented several features of the already existent MP18 under his own name before setting up at C&Rsenal, where he further developed his submachine gun. Hugo had plenty of other designs that we'll hopefully cover some other day. Along with those, we may even get to talk about other designers who now flocked to this new weapon, the submachine gun. And yeah, technically the Villers-Perosa was existent before this gun, and there's even some evidence of shoulder-stocked versions of it and other guns. Split up Villers-Perosa, the Beretta. There's some argument there as to which gun came first, but to my understanding, all of those Italian guns, well, they're pretty complicated. The fire rates are all over the place, and they don't seem to have made it into the front lines, and if they did, we sure as heck can't prove it yet. No. This gun made it into the fight. This gun was fully developed from the start, and this gun set the pattern that was emulated for decades to come. Dead simple and deadly effective. It deserves the title of first of its kind. So, with that said, let's get Mae's opinion on what it's like to use this thing. All right, once again, we've made room for Mae, and we have probably one of our more interesting episodes right here. This feels like we're in that range with the Pedersen device, so the Winchester trench gun. It's another gun that people really like to think about, the MP18, the world's first practical submachine gun. That's cool. Now, just to be clear, that's because this is a shoulder-stocked, pistol caliber, fully automatic, carbine-style weapon. So it's a, at the time they didn't know necessarily to call it a submachine gun. The Germans called it a Maschinen Pistole. This is a gun that's just a little tiny carbine with a lot of danger beans.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, that's not a bad title to call it because it's a machine gun, but with a pistol cartridge. So it totally makes sense that that's where they would go with their designation on it.
Oh, yeah. And then the British called it the pistol gun after that because that's just what the Germans called it. And
this is what I would think of it as, too. I can't disagree with their assessment on that.
Yeah. So that's how new of a concept, though. We take it for granted how much we know about these guns. So let's kind of set back the clock and pretend we're in World War I and you've only ever seen the stuff that we've already seen in this show. And then this thing wanders into the battlefield. Mae, what's it feel like? What would you describe to somebody if you're trying to explain this thing?
Well, so like he said, this is not quite like anything we've shot before. Not quite like a machine gun or a rifle or a carbine or a pistol. It's definitely different. It's very compact yet incredibly dense. Amazing to me that it's a pistol cartridge accompanying this thing. He's right. It kind of makes me think of the Pedersen device in that respect. But, that's a full rifle with a stick mag pistol cartridge. This one, not quite that.
Carbine with a stick mag pistol cartridge.
I know. Well, so here's the thing. As it is right now, like I said, very dense, but the balance feels pretty good. I'm feeling pretty tight on this. This feels maneuverable. It feels fantastic.
How is that as a carbine? Hold on, I know where you're going, but give me 1 second. How is that as a carbine? Semi-pistol grip stock, get up on your shoulder again for a second.
Okay.
Where's your grip at? How's that feel?
Well, so right here, where I've got my rear hand, my right hand, it feels pretty good. I've got the semi-pistol grip. It's locked on. It feels like it's depositing my finger just enough forward enough where it needs to be,
Maybe a smidge thicker than you like?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay.
And then my left hand kind of feels like it's in an awkward place because I've got these finger grooves here that obviously it's where I'm supposed to put my hand, and they showed that in the training manuals as well.
They were very intense about that.
Right,
That's
they
where you put your
really
hand.
wanted them here. And I understand why, because you can't put it up here. That's the hot zone after a while.
Can't put it where the hole is.
Right, because that's where, rounds are casing are going to come out. And then I can't put it here because that's, this is the mag release and this is where the mag is going to be, and I don't want to go messing with that. So I literally have to hold it back here almost like an 8mm show shot. I've got to tuck my forearm in.
And you have to have the finger grooves because it does kind of want to shift on you.
Yes.
So you want bite, but if you were to reach up and grab this edge.
Right, and then I'm getting into the bolt where it needs to move.
Yeah,
so there's no wraparound, there's no wiggle room for where you're putting your hand, boys and girls. You're putting it here.
Yeah, that thing wants to punch your piggies.
Just a little bit. And then
we got a problem.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting into, was this guy. So you've got to be able to load this in, and even just with no rounds in there, because this is empty, you can already feel the weight difference on your forearm right here. It really does weigh you down. And then unfortunately, 32 rounds of 9mm in there, yeah, it's gonna add up.
Now, you could argue that that's the case with any horizontally mounted magazine system. As a matter of fact, in some ways, that one at least rakes back, so it's staying a little closer to the center of gravity for the gun. You've handled Stens. Would you say that this is different or the same as a Sten in having that weight off to the left side?
It's similar, but the problem is that it's still different enough because this is a pretty heavy mass in and of itself. Adding the rounds to it, 32 rounds on top of that, that's a lot of weight. And then on top of that, this mag itself isn't actually quite stable because it's slowly like a clock winding its way down this little arm right here, which it's a small amount of vibration, but it does, you do perceive it.
It doesn't have a perfect fit in the well either, so it kind of can slap around. And that thing is a tumor. As a matter of fact, let me see it. Can you take that out for a second? I want to make a point here. The Tromble magazine is not stupid, and I'm not making fun of the Tromble magazine because the Tromble magazine solved the problem of putting 32 rounds into a Luger pistol. And if you have a Luger pistol and you're using this thing, that is balanced. It hooks back and then forward in order to center that mass. So like along this axis, this thing is centered.
And then on top of that, it's not in your way. Where it's at on the Luger, it's below your hand, below your grip.
It stabilizes the Luger because it's a weight at the bottom. You guys have seen this. You can hang a weight, a pendulum at the bottom of something and stabilize it for balance.
Right.
Like a guy going across a tightrope with the pole on either side to even the weight, although this is just pulling the weight straight down. This balances the Luger. It doesn't upset it. I mean, it sticks off a little bit to the left on that gun, but not nearly. That's off, and then you're shouldered with the stock and it's fine.
Whereas this one, where the balance was fine just on its own, the moment you add that in there, it off balances the gun incredibly.
Which kind of tells a separate story, which is that Hugo Schmeisser designed that gun with a double stack stick magazine, a lot like we saw with Stens and other guns for decades to come.
That'll work perfectly.
And then imagine you're Hugo. You know, you're really proud. Hugo, are you proud of your gun? I
mean, I'm pretty proud. I put a lot of effort into it. I mean,
hey, I need you to put this on it. This has to go on there.
Where?
Off to the left side.
Can I just twist everything?
No, let's go. We got to keep the hinge there. Just put this on the gun. Yeah. Yep. On the GPK. Yeah, that's fine. Everything's fine.
It wiggles.
No, that's fine. It's fine if it wiggles a little bit.
I have to have a sleeve?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's gonna over insert and get bent up by the bolt if we don't put the sleeve there.
What?
Yeah,
that's not.
No, don't. It's just go with that.
How is that fine?
I know it's another 5 pounds off to the left side.
I put a lot of effort into this gun.
Hugo, no.
It's off balance now. It wants to shoot like this.
Look, we're already making these.
I'm not a gangster.
It took us 2 years to get this thing into production. We're going to make more of them, okay? No. Those, we're making those.
I don't. Hugo's sad.
Okay, so we don't care for the magazine very much, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. But
can they tell?
How hard is it to balance that gun with that mag there?
Realistically, it is incredibly difficult for balance. At first, don't get me wrong, as you lose rounds, it gets easier, but the problem still lies in that you've suddenly got this massive weight off to the side that is ever so slightly jiggling.
And you're trained to hold down the center line.
Right, so it would have felt so much nicer if I could have gripped right here, because I found, and this is just not something we could do because it's not something that they were used for training.
Oh, we could totally do it. You've shot it that way plenty of times.
I have shot it this way plenty of times. This feels way better. It's still slightly awkward, but it feels way better than gripping right here. I am constantly having to fight it even empty just to keep it from twisting and me shooting gangster.
May I have that?
Yes.
I found my favorite grip. Let me show you guys where you can see it. And I'm holding it sideways. I don't actually shoot it sideways.
Make sure you keep your pinky away from the mag release.
I tend to put my pinky up here on the inside of the mag release, all the fingers to the outside of it. And then that, to me, with a loaded mag, balances the weight. Right now, it's a little heavy to the inside, but with a fully loaded mag, it tends to even out. And I can even let go of the gun and just hold it like this. And it's steady, but if I do this and try to hold the gun up, I am putting a ton of weight. Look at, I'm already accidentally gripping up over the wood. It's down here, you gotta hold it, and it's trying to get that torque is really troublesome. So ergonomically, balance-wise, that magazine is a pain. So I'm just gonna take it off for a moment while you talk about the rest of this gun. Because you still have your
there's more to it than that, because I feel like we've done a good job talking 10 minutes about that.
It's a tube, but tell us about safety and stuff like that, because they don't know. Nobody's seen this before. Remember, we're playing imaginary no submachine guns.
This is unique and different. So yeah, the safety I found incredibly easy and simple to use. Open bolt system. This means it's live, ready to fire, of course. And if I want to just make it safe, you just rack back, rotate, and pop her in. It's not something I can slap off. It's not easy, and it does take a lot of weight in order to pull it back and make it live again.
And if I'm the officer nearby, I can see very clearly what it's
safe.
Big
visual indicator right there with the S. It's got a nice deep cut groove in here. Like,
even an illiterate can understand what it's doing. Like, I see it blocking it. I understand it.
And then the handle off the bolt, it's a nice big jut. It juts out pretty far, easy to grip. There's no real screwing that one up. It's pretty great. And then if I want to be able to take this gun down, we normally don't talk about takedowns on this show because it's not really something that we talk about like ergonomically. It's not really even something necessary.
Well, we talk about it in the history and sort of the development, but we don't tend to talk about it in the main conversation. But the more we've handled automatics, the more clear it's been it's critical because we always have to go into them for repairs.
Well, the reason why I wanted to talk about this one specifically was because, open bolt system, you're going to be worried about mud and muck and things like that getting in there. And that is a major concern, especially for something that's fully automatic. But for this one, the takedown is a nice, simple push of that button. I can get into this gun.
Yeah, push button, turn cap.
Right.
And then it's like one of those peanut things and snakes come out.
Oh, what? No, I don't.
Yeah,
well, mud snakes. Yeah, no, but seriously, yeah, you just twist it off and you can get inside, and I can have this gun cleaned out so easily. So that's why I really want to bring it up, was because that's a fantastic feature they've gotten there.
And you can swap the barrel by driving off the front sight, turning
like a rotary phone. I remember you talking about that.
You drive the front sight, you rotate that front piece, and we are unsure. We believe the longer screw of the set screws on the side may orient the barrel because the factory-wise, the barrel has to have a specific orientation for the feed.
Right.
So you do have to maybe loosen that screw a bit and take the barrel out, but that's it. It's not a lot. Like, it's super easy to get in and out of this gun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So yeah, that pretty much covers everything. There's a nice mag release button right here that's big and obvious and easy enough to depress single-handed. A semi-pistol grip, comb heights right where it needs to be. We'll get into shooting in a second, but that pretty much covers everything except, again, like we said, just be careful. And after a while, you will notice it doesn't tend to generate a lot of heat on it when we're shooting because of these nice little.
Yeah, it's vented pretty well, but I still wouldn't want to hold it up there.
No, you're still tempted, but no.
So, magazine release though, actually. Give me 1 second. Go ahead and insert this mag quick as you can.
Okay.
It's no flaring.
Well, it's because you told me to do it quickly.
Well, I know, but there's no flaring, there's no aid, and you're aiming a small target for a small target. So magazine loading's a little weird, and then go ahead and think about, not like that. Imagine, go like you're shooting the gun.
Oh, yeah,
and then try to quick strip a magazine out of that. And it's just it's this weird...
You gotta basically, if you want to one-hand it, you need to effectively get this in such a way that you can quick release your hand, wrap your hand around so you can depress your thumb and grab the mag. And the problem is that I think this piece right here is just too long. If it were half an inch shorter,
but it has to be to support this so it doesn't bend. Because that's the other thing is this sticks off the side so much, and I think people are like, why does that jut out? And the problem is if it didn't, this would just bend. It needs enough metal support. And then you wonder why they didn't go all the way down. Well, then you'd have that piece of metal jutting out every time you try to use the gun.
Right,
so the compromise is get halfway down the length so it doesn't bend this.
Yeah.
So again, trommel mag for the lose. But what about shooting it? What's it like being behind the sights?
All right, lining up my sights. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to say these are pretty decent sights. They're, for what I'm shooting at. They're big, they're blocky, they're tall, but then they're also blocky. So when it comes to maybe past 100 yards, maybe into 150, 200, I think it's going to start to get a little bit difficult. I almost wish they'd done...
the lapel?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. They put a little tiny notch right there to kind of see where the center of where the front sight was.
It definitely most reminds me of the Borchardt or late label sights with just big blocky sights, although instead of being square cut, this is inverted V.
Yes.
And then it's so thick that I agree. They probably could have cut a channel in the front sight to allow you a little finer accuracy because it's getting kind of hard to read at 100 yards. You get down to a target size that's smaller than the width of the front sight, and you start wondering where you are in the front sight. And I know it's not the most accurate gun, but it still would help a little bit. But overall, at close range, these sights are hard to beat.
Yeah, no, they are pretty fantastic, and I thought a decent job. No difficulty finding my target on that one, and keeping my target, but I'm going to get into that in a second.
Okay.
Pulling the trigger, it's a nice single-stage trigger, very smooth, easy, and I honestly loved it. It felt very much like glass, barely any cliff there to pull off of.
Better than it needs to be for a submachine gun.
I will agree with that one. The only thing that I thought was a little bit off was the lock time. When I first fired it, I still remember because I guess I thought I was going to fire a split second sooner than what it did.
Well,
it takes so long.
You're used to sear release and then bang.
Right.
You're not used to sear release
and then
mass. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think of. It's almost like slow motion. I can almost just snap the fire rate.
Well, it's like one of those Nerf football launchers where you big spring and you kind of hit it and there's this feeling of something shifting, but then after that, bang. Just add an explosion to the end of that process.
Right. And then my hand's right back here with it, so all of a sudden everything's going hokong, hokong, hokong. I don't know. It just, that very first time I do remember it was just, unusual. Now, granted, it's not something that I think threw me off. Like, I don't think it affected my shooting at all. It was just
maybe
something...
the first round?
Maybe, if that. But that's just it. Like, it was so long ago that I first shot this, because I first shot it, like, I think after Mark had his hands on it for a while. They did some good restoration there, but...
It's sort of just... To me, it's weird, because it feels like if you're a revolver shooter, it feels like you're having to do the sort of breath-holdy, careful double action shot, which you do because in double action, you're trying to squeeze a trigger without disturbing your aim.
Right. I do my best to keep my hand as steady as possible.
Right. But you're actually not doing the muscle strength. You're just doing that stability thing.
Right.
And you're pulling a trigger that is actually a single action trigger, so it feels really smooth and crisp. But then it's like, once you pull it, you feel the sear let go, and the game is... hold still just for that nanosecond, or not even second, it's almost like a half second.
Hold still, hold your finger in, and just wait. And then you can almost think it out with the first shot. It was just that slow for your first time. But after that, you get used to it. And then keeping her on target. That I found pretty easy. I honestly thought with the weight of the mag or with the jiggle of it, it was going to be a little bit difficult. And then with the blocky sights, I thought maybe at some point, and it's a fully automatic. I'm thinking I've shot those
other
before.
submachine guns.
Yeah, I know what that's going to feel like.
And especially like I've shot modern stuff that stays on target just fine. And then I've shot a lot of World War II stuff. Like again, we talked about Stens or Grease Gun. Grease Gun has that little tiny aperture, and it's like I've gotten used to these little tiny weird apertures. And the fact that my sights will they'll wander. So my sight will I don't know how to explain it. The gun has almost no recoil. It's not pushing me around. It's just the gun itself is jiggling.
Right.
And with the gun itself jiggling, my sight jiggles and I just can't quite keep them in alignment and I can't see through the hole anyway. And I just go, and I start walking the shots in. Like it's just every time. And I thought this was going to be the case with this one.
But no, honestly, that pistol cartridge, man, that makes it so easy to
Well, it's not just the pistol, because the other ones are pistol cartridge.
Well, I know, pistol cartridge on top of that, the weight's decent,
It's a lot heavier.
Right, so that really kind of helps you out there.
And then open sights. It's weird, but this is the one time where I don't prefer the aperture. I think the open sights work better for this. I can follow the front and rear. So how would you rate the firing overall then?
Fantastic. I mean, seriously, under 150 yards, I feel pretty confident with this guy. And granted, we aren't even shooting out that far, but even so, the big open sights, the cartridge itself with this gun, with this weight, and, semi-pistol grip pulls it in, there are a lot of pros that are going with this guy.
So what I'm hearing is if you were a World War I army, not just a person, you would issue those standard issue. That's what everybody would have, right?
No. So this is one of those types of guns that it comes with conditions. I wouldn't want to have to be on open terrain. I especially don't want to be on the Eastern Front. And on top of that...
Not anywhere you have a long way to go.
Exactly. And on top of that, I don't know, it's still a pistol cartridge. Granted, yeah, full auto, but even at that, come on, man. This isn't something you want to issue out to everybody at certain conditions. Under 150 yards, I'm thinking this is more like short to mid-range at best. I'd want this in the trench with me.
This is a gun designed for urban fighting, and well, not even designed for urban fighting, but it would work in urban situations. It would work in very naturally dense areas, like maybe a forest or a jungle, and it would work in the trenches, which is what it was designed for.
Would not work in mountainous regions. You don't want to be shooting from one mountain to the next.
Not unless you're breaking a bunker.
Right.
And then it's not going to work on plains. It's not, they wouldn't know, if you could have issued it to everybody on the veldt in, the Boer War, they would not be happy.
Nope.
They would have no use for it. So it's not universal. And that's something that we kind of have to talk about, because we always get asked, what's your number one pick? What's the best weapon? And we run into this problem of it might not be the one you think. It might be the worst one, because at some level, let's say we have like a 50-something inch long gun that's very accurate. Or let's get into like the 1917 Enfield, right? Rear aperture sight, long range shooter, heavy barrel, heavy whatever, great accurate gun. Best as a sniper platform almost.
Sure.
But it comes with a bayonet and it's a bolt action. So if you took that gun into Boer War, or into a long-range conflict on one of the various fronts of the war, you would have a great weapon.
Yeah, it'd be perfectly fine. It's suited to the situation. Whereas
it might be the best weapon in that. Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you try to take this one into it,
Nothing.
Maybe even a carbine in general, you wouldn't necessarily want that either. You want something with a long sight radius with that aperture sight. Like that in and of itself, and a decent cartridge that can do the distance.
On top of it.
Yes. So
you take that gun, and you take it out of that mode, and you put this gun in, and you can't hit anything. Nothing. No. Zero.
You're lucky if you do.
You take that same gun and you stick it in the trench, and don't get me wrong, you can't pop, and you wouldn't want to have that gun up against this gun at under 100 yards.
Right.
But it can kill people at short range.
It can.
It can. It's just slower, but it can. And you get a lot of them with infantry, and enough of those equals one of these.
Right.
And it becomes this balancing game of like, there is no universal perfect weapon at that time.
It's always going to be situational. Yeah, we can honestly pick what we think might be our most rounded one, but the problem is that
we can name a gun that tried to do this. The BAR.
Oh, yeah.
The BAR tried to be a rifle that was semi-automatic, that you could use anywhere, long range, blah, 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 and then use it at short range with burst fire with this hip cup thing and all this other stuff.
But then we ran into the issues. You and I both experienced the hip cup situation where it does put you off balance, and we both, everyone that shot it, that got to try that with the hip cup, agreed, get rid of that thing, just use it normal at the hip.
Yeah, it ends up being this, even without the hip cup issue, like nuts to that. Just the fact that it was even, the thing we said about the BAR, I recall, is like, why is there full auto?
Right.
Like, why bother?
You can't use it from the shoulder like a rifle in full auto mode. That just, it feels practically uncontrollable there. Yeah. So you can only handle it at the hip, which is weird.
Yeah, in that cartridge, it's full power cartridge, you're only getting 20 rounds of it.
Right.
Like, it's one of those, like, jack of all trades, master of none. And yet, if you stop and think about it, that's what we're looking at here now. We're looking at something that was called a Maschinen Pistole, or a pistol gun, or, you might even think of it as a pistol carbine. Because at the time, they didn't have the word submachine gun, right? Mm-hmm. So they would have just, they were still making up words for this. It was so new. And it's kind of that same thing as the BAR. It's a mashup. It's like, we'll take this weird Luger magazine, we'll put it in a carbine, but the carbine will be full auto like a machine gun. It's not that different from how they started thinking about the BAR. And yet, this seems infinitely more successful in that it has been repeated out. Just take the magazine off of it, and every other aspect of this has been repeated for decades afterwards.
Oh yeah, the mobility that this presented for soldiers was fantastic.
So I guess the question is, in the context where it's appropriate, if you're told that you are going to end up in a firefight, and that firefight will be at under 150 yards.
Yeah, odds are close range. Would
you take this?
Yeah, are you kidding? Absolutely. I would definitely take this into battle with me if the conditions or the situation was what I needed it to be. That close range shooting is really where this thing thrives.
But what I'm really saying is, what's your confidence on it in that range? Like, in other words, let's take out all the places it doesn't work and leave it in just the range where it does work.
Just the only world that it works in.
Right. Does the gun, because what we haven't talked about is reliability of the gun itself and confidence in the gun itself within its context. How confidently do you rate, like, where do you put this on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best?
I think I probably put it at between an 8 and a 9, which is still really up there. And the reason why I even put it in that range is because on the pro side of things, it's incredibly mobile. It's easily accessible for cleaning or clearing any issues with it. It's, I thought, a very easy gun to use. And on top of that, I didn't really have any issues keeping on target. I didn't have to sight this gun in. It naturally was shooting where I wanted it to shoot there was no question of my aim on this one. The only reason I wouldn't give it a perfect 10, I would think, is because of this trauma magazine.
Fears of it breaking?
Right, fears of it breaking, fears of it just causing the off-balance issues, fears of it just having any issues. That's where my fear is with this guy. This one on its own, if I just had this, I'd probably give this a 10. But with that trauma mag, it's got to get bumped down between like an 8 and a 9. Okay,
so this thing's really debilitating for the platform. But even with this attached, now here's the bigger question.
Heck yeah, I would take this. Are you kidding me? This thing is awesome. Even with that guy, snag me him. This thing is bad A.
Yeah, we've contextualized enough. I think we've done a lot to sort of dial it down and make it, but no, that thing's cool as heck. Like,
oh, yeah.
It's super cool, guys. And it works. Like, it's really, once we got it set up, because all of this game that we had to play in Restoration was a dimensional game. Mm-hmm. Once we had it set up correctly, it just works. Like,
and then it can just run forever. Like, granted, I'm sure eventually after time you get a meltdown on it, but dang, can it run for a while?
Yeah, we only have 2 trommel mags to cycle back and forth. You can't load them as fast as you can shoot them. So, but even then, it doesn't cook up that hot. Like, it
dissipates the heat very well.
Yeah. So I have a very high degree of confidence in that particular weapon in its context. Even, like, again, I agree with you. The trommel magazine is a big debilitator. So it's one of those things, you know. It's just that one little freckle that you can't.
Like I said, I've said it before. I don't know if I said it on here. It's kind of like a poem. It's just like there's always going to be some bit of a tragedy to it or some bit of irony with it, and then there's there's nothing interesting about a story that doesn't have a twist, that doesn't have a fault. Like, that's its twist.
Yeah,
that's
you can't. The MP18 can't be a Mary Sue. It has to have some sort of debilitating feature because it's a World War I firearm. Yeah. They all do. So it's although it is wild. Can I see that?
Yeah.
Can you imagine, like, this gun was supposed to compete with. Well, so it was competing for that close range thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we need something that works really effectively at close range to clear everything up.
Right.
And everybody wanted to make a universal weapon for that. So the BAR tries to be everything. The Pedersen device tries to make the 1903 into an everything gun. They fail. And the Germans go, let's just make a gun that is for close range. And then we'll have rifles with it. Like, we have men. Not every man needs to be an army unto himself. So we're just going to make this thing. And since we're just going to make it, we can make it simpler. So you end up coming up with a tube with a cylinder in it and a firing pin in that, and a spring, and then a rifle barrel. And the only thing complicated in terms of machining operations on this entire gun are, like, vaguely the trigger guard, but mostly this magwell. Like, this whole magazine assembly, that is fairly complicated to mill out of metal. Not crazy, not anything like we've seen on even most of the handguns in this show, but I would argue that the MP18 is probably the simplest to manufacture thing we have seen in the entire show, and yet devastatingly effective.
Oh yeah, incredibly effective at within a certain range limit.
Right, so congratulations, Hugo. By the way, take the most complicated thing we've ever seen on the show and just stick that in there. Just take the most complicated, terrible clockwork thing. It's like a spring that leads to another spring and a clockwork and a blow. Like, this thing's nuts.
The amount of time it took to make that, they could have probably made several stick mags well over.
A dozen.
Yeah.
I understand what they were doing. Like, I get from a supply point that they wanted to have one large capacity pistol magazine. I understand that. And they couldn't make it double stack because then it wouldn't work with the Luger.
Nope.
But they probably should have just made 2. Really, by the time, well, I say that, but then honestly, they never made enough of these. Like, they were, even as painful as this is to make, they made enough of them. These were easier to crank out than to set up an established manufacturer of this by the time they got to it.
Right.
So, and a lot of this is competing for the right quality steel and blah, blah, blah. So, okay, I get it. It's not like it completely doomed the gun, but these are terrible. Ergonomically, they're terrible. Functionally, they're terrible. They're the one thing that breaks your confidence in the gun, because this is the thing that would break out of anything.
Breaks my absolute confidence. I still have confidence in it. It just makes it not absolute.
Right. There's nothing I would prefer to use at short range than this in the war. And so the competitors is, again, BAR, which can do long range and short range, but is uncontrollable at hip fire.
Pedersen device, which, there we got our pistol cartridge, and we can fire from the shoulder as a rifle, but you got to deal with the Pedersen device.
I don't have a lot of confidence in that cartridge.
Nope.
And I don't have any confidence in the system to run, and neither did the Army. Like, when they finally came back and tested those things, they were all garbage.
Yeah, they were like, nope.
They rusted up and sealed up and fell apart. So, no Pedersen device. And then, can you think of the other one? The other gun that sort of fits in this category?
Well, you already talked about it. The 97, the Winchester, yeah.
Yeah, so the trench gun, shotgun, which really loses effectiveness beyond 50 yards. You don't even get 150. So, and even within those 50 yards, I don't think it's as devastating as this. I think this is, I have far more confidence
devastating
within 50 yards with this than I do with the Winchester.
Yeah.
Like, it's as much as everybody got excited about it, I don't see it. I see this. This is the supreme close weapon for World War One. And
I would agree.
Tell they didn't stick a bayonet lug on it because they
know.
knew.
That's the indicator, right?
What's the point? Like, if you might as well spend your time reloading the mag. You get a lot more out of putting another mag in this than by going ahead and using it as a bayonet.
Yep.
And I guarantee you, they told those MP18 gunners, don't get into hand-to-hand combat. Just hang back and just keep yourself loaded and blast everything you see. Because there's no provision. As a close quarters weapon that does not have a bayonet lug on it, I'm going to tell you, they knew to just keep firing the gun. That was better than having the blade at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And that says a lot for how the Germans felt about this gun. Because for it to be man-portable, close quarters, no bayonet lug, yeah, they just knew they didn't need it. They knew that there's no point at which you have to make that transition like you do with the rifle.
There was no situation that was going to come up that it was going to be necessary for this gun.
Yeah, you might, if it's that locked up, ditch it. Because if it's running at all, you then load it.
Don't waste your time. Yeah. Just get it going.
And it's fantastic. I honestly think this is probably one of the best things to come out of the war in terms of devastation per pfennig. You know what I mean? Like how much money or time you put into a weapon and how much you get out of it. There's not a lot that compares to the yield for something like this. And we'll see a ton of this in World War II. Everybody's going to be making slapdash wartime submachine guns whenever we get to talking about World War II. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason why. Really cheap and really effective for what kind of money you're spending.
Cheap and devastating. That's the motto right there.
I mean, this will almost become a Russian identity, is this kind of thing. So it's a brilliant idea that was actually born in World War I, and we never get to say that. It's always stuff that was like, most of World War I is actual evolution, the way people don't like to think about it, which is that a bunch of stuff was made and then most of it went extinct and the best ones survived. That's how most World War I weapons are. This is actually something purposely bred out of the war.
Well, they didn't even know what to really call it. They called it the Maschinen Pistole, so...
Yeah, well, I mean, they called it the machine pistol. The British sort of called it the pistol gun for a little while, emulating the Germans. And then eventually we get the word submachine gun, which is close, but realistically it's no better than calling it a machine pistol or a pistol gun because submachine gun really belies what you do with it. You don't really use it like a machine gun. You use it like a really effective carbine in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I almost wonder if machine carbine isn't the better word, but of course that's never... it is what it is now, but tactically it's all over the place. Yeah. So it's an entirely new class of weapon, though. Arguably, people will say, oh, and I said this earlier in the episode, but they'll say Villa-Perosa and things like that. They work entirely differently. Now, the Beretta 18, the OVP, those are guns that did work like this gun works. But they don't appear to have made it to the battle, and if they did, they made it so late that this was already there and doing its job. So I'm very happy to give this guy the title of first. So you would take it in the battle, though. We got a high ranking?
High rankings from that one. Definitely something within 150 yards I would feel very confident using.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's going to wrap us up. I'm glad you could join us for something so unique. If you'd like to see anything about what's going on with the show, stay tuned after the credits for any updates. But otherwise, have a good one.
Night, guys.
Oh boy, I have a lot of people to thank for this episode. Our buddy Rusty for fronting an opportunity, FC and David for chasing paperwork, Mark and his team for the still ongoing restoration of this particular piece, Bruno for, well, things I actually can't discuss yet because there may be more. Also Alex, the curator at Springfield National Historic Site, for yet again digging out the camera and calipers for us. Make certain if you enjoyed this episode to drop them a line of thanks for their hard work. Plus, at the 11th hour, our buddy Folke for advice and some archival material. And, of course, Mae for going above and beyond, setting up the visuals and doing the editing. It's all a team effort, and whenever possible, we give every bit we can to those who help. To make that a possibility, please consider supporting us on Patreon, or Subscribestar if that's your preference, or visiting the C&Rsenal shop. Alright, thank you all for watching.